Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic video. This is going to be another one talking about the upcoming Kyoshi novels, the first one of course called The Rise of Kyoshi. And in this one I want to talk a little bit more about, I suppose, the writing style and maybe what to expect on that front. Whereas obviously in my previous videos I've more discussed here's what we know about Kyoshi and maybe some things that means that the books basically have to keep in continuity, they'll have to expand on some of that stuff, but here more about the writing style. So what we know is that they've specifically said it's going to be published by Abrams Books, who primarily do children's books as well as young adult books, and it's been specifically said that this is going to be a YA, a young adult book. That's going to be the, I suppose, age rating, the way they're aiming this book, and I think the reaction to this has been a little mixed in that, like, I think the overall announcement has people excited, but there's some concern around just like, oh, young adult, what does that exactly mean? And I think it probably does come down to the fact that, look, not everyone is a big reader. If you don't read a lot of books, you may not know necessarily that YA is actually probably a good thing for this book, and you may interpret that more on the young side of the term instead of the adult side of the term, whereas it probably does lean more towards adult. So just in terms of, I suppose, addressing that and what it actually means, to me, like, the really obvious young adult book that I would immediately think of myself would be The Hunger Games. That series is, to me, quintessential young adult, in that it can have a pretty dark, kind of intense subject matter, but it's very readable. I've read those books, and you know, say what you will about the actual content of those stories, you know, what they deal with in terms of death, what The Hunger Games actually are, you know, it's not a kid's book as such. Like, you wouldn't give this to a very young child to read because it involves death quite heavily. It gets into, like, war and some pretty intense stuff happening. And so, to me, the Kyoshi book, to me, they're basically saying it's going to be somewhat like that in terms of, you know, what it can do. And to me, the book being young adult basically is telling me that this book is in a way going to be able to do a little bit more than the show. Because the problem that I think some people are having is that, oh, if it's for kids, we won't get as much as the show. When we sometimes forget that, yes, okay, look, Avatar and Korra are amazing, and you almost forget about the fact that they're Nickelodeon shows, but they are Nickelodeon shows, and they had certain limitations in that the word death couldn't really be used. They could not really show death, or when someone did die, they had to be very careful about the way they worded it. The best example of that is probably the Earth Queen, in that, like, she was taken out, and while of course it was very obvious and they made it as clear as they could that she was killed, the fact that they couldn't say it, I don't think it really took anything away, but it would have been, like, obviously more fluid for them to be able to just say that. Them doing a young adult book, to me, says that they're going to be able to say if someone died. They're going to be able to have intense stuff like that happen, and it not have to be sort of walked around, just because it is in a slightly different medium. In the same way that the comics seem a little bit more open with regards to stuff like Korosami, whereas maybe there is still a sense of, like, oh, we can't go too far into that relationship, because, you know, we're on Nickelodeon. But in the comics, you can be much more open with that because, you know, you have a slightly different audience because it's a comic. Similarly with a book, and especially a young adult book, you can immediately deal with that stuff and explore it if you need to. So the fact that it's young adult, to me, is actually a very exciting thing, because it could make for one of the more in-depth stories in all of Avatar that we've ever gotten. Because it's going to be 2 books. We know that the first book's going to be, like, I think it's over 350 pages. I'd have to look at the listing again, but it's 300 and something pages. And to me, that immediately says this isn't a kid's book that they're writing here. For them to have 300 pages, even if there's not much text on the page, that is a lot of content. And the fact that, like, they're releasing it as like a hardcover, it is good. There is going to be a second novel that continues on the story. That by the end we're going to have close to, or in or around 700 pages of content about Kyoshi. And I don't think they're going to do it in a way where we just get no information. Now, I'll admit Avatar has a pretty bad track record when it comes to novels or books. The most recent thing that we have are these two books. I only have one of them with me right now, but Legend of Korra Revolution, and the other one is called Endgame. So these were two kind of books that were released in between book 1 and 2 that basically are novelizations of book 1. So this covers the first, 6 episodes. The other one covers the other 6 episodes. And there was some excitement about, like, oh, cool, like they're novelizing it. So if we get these, it'll give us extra information on the show. These are going to be really cool, essential books to get because there'll be so much more information. But then you get the book and you realize that, look how many words are on each page. Barely any. And the writing is very, very basic. There's no real extra depth given. I think if I remember correctly, I've done reviews on these on my channel, so you can go back and watch them if you want. There's maybe like a 1 or 2 like slightly new scenes, but in the grand scheme of things, they add basically nothing to the book. I think there's a few mistakes as well with regards to continuity in this, in that when they mention, I think, Jinora, Milo, and Ikki's ages, I think they're wrong compared to what they actually are. So, clearly this is an example of something where not a lot of effort was really put into, I suppose, making it all that interesting, in that this is what I would call a young reader's book. In that this is basically a book where you'd be like, okay, you like Korra, you're learning how to read kind of type thing. Why don't you read this book, which you know basically what's going to happen, but here's a book that will kind of help you to read and maybe get a little bit more out of it. This is a book where I think was very much written with, they're not trying to add more on. They're just trying to, do a novelization. That's not what the Kyoshi book is going to do. For one, because obviously it's not like this and it's just an adaptation. But I don't think it's going to be like this, where we have, basically no words on the page, and it be, extremely simply written, just no depth, no descriptive writing to at all really in this book. And I think that's going to be the main difference. When it really comes down to it, I suppose, how descriptive the writing is more or less kind of the thing that determines kind of the rating for the book in terms of ease of reading, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. In that, I don't think the Kyoshi book is going to be like a Star Wars novel like this, like Star Wars Thrawn, one of the more recent books, where, there is a lot more words on each page. It's much more descriptive about the planets that they go to, setting the scene, setting the atmosphere, in depth into the characters' heads about what's happening, and, building the universe out and stuff like that. I don't think we're going to go quite that in depth, because these are kind of more, sci-fi stuff. Similarly, I also don't think it's going to be like, a Halo novel or anything like that, where again, they're describing the military stuff that's going on in great detail, what weapons the characters are using, planets they're going to, military tactics, as well as going into the characters' heads and what else is going on. In terms of young adult, I do think it's probably going to be more on the style of something like this, where it's like a light novel on the manga, anime light novel side of things, where it's going to be easy to read. It's going to have a very, very accessible, in terms of how easy it is to read. I don't think we're going to have a crazy amount of words on the page, like this isn't too bad. But there is some descriptive writing. They do explain where they are. Obviously with a light novel you get some maps and stuff like that. You do get a few kind of image type things of like, I don't know if the Kyoshi book is going to have too much imagery stuff throughout it. I'd like it if they had a few pages of just images to like show us like, this is what Kyoshi looks like when she's younger. This is Kyoshi without the makeup and stuff like that. But to me, I think it's going to be more like this in terms of the style of writing, in that I think the story that they're going to have to tell in this is going to warrant, I suppose, pacing equivalent to like a light novel type thing. Because obviously if it's going to cover like the rise of Kyoshi, and the two books together are going to cover her whole life, that means you're going to have to be fairly quick paced about how you gradually cover the different ages of her life. I assume they're going to be fairly quickly skipping through a lot of the key events of like, you know, very quickly establishing like, you'll probably come in when she's like maybe 4, 5, 6, and you know, during that section of the story establish, you know, this is where she lives, this is where she was born, her parents and stuff like that. Key event happening, this is where she discovers her bending. This is when she's discovered by the rest of the world basically as the Avatar. This is when she leaves to start her training. Here's a key event during training here, training here, training here. Here's her finishing her training and going on to do other stuff. Here's the, you know, Chin the Conqueror incident. Here's the peasant uprising of Ba Sing Se. Here's the formation of the Kyoshi warriors. Like, I wonder how flowing the book is going to be in terms of its writing style. I think if there's anything that could keep the book from, you know, being like super well written or anything like that, that might be where you kind of say it, is that like, is it literally just going to be, you know, this year this happened, one chapter, boom, skip ahead 5 years, this is when this happened? Or is there going to be more of a through line throughout all of it, where, for me, based on what we know right now, her relationship with the Earth King at the time, at least the one that would be in power at the time of her like early life, because a lot of the events we know happened within like the first 40 or so years of her life, so it pretty much would be the same Earth King that like is present when she's born up until like the whole peasant uprising thing. And obviously she lives so long that she probably sees like, you know, at least 2 more, maybe 3 Earth Kings come and go from power. But that first one, you know, you could really build a story around a lot of the key events in the start of her life of this Earth King, the one that we know about, causes a lot of issues. It really, how he rules affects how she grows up, and that might explain a lot of her attitude around the whole Chin the Conqueror thing, heading into the peasant uprising and so on, and afterwards. So that's definitely something I wonder about, is just, like, I want it to be somewhat descriptive in that, like, I want the book to feel confident enough to just tell us the name of a place. Like, what is the original name of that peninsula? What is, like, the village that becomes Kyoshi Island? The village, like, before it's called, like, Chin Village and Kyoshi Island, when the separation happens. What is that place called, like, before then? Even the Shell's story, which covers the like formation of the Kyoshi warriors, doesn't really tell us the name of the place. So that would be a very telling thing for me about like the style of writing, how in depth they're going to go. Is just, will they give us place names when we have to go places? I assume we will get references like that, like Ba Sing Se will be name dropped, Omashio I assume would be name dropped, these type of places. But will they give us new information like that? Like, this is the name of her town, and so on. That's what I want. And similarly, like, you know, just with a lot of the other characters that are going to have to be involved, like, will they properly develop Chin as things go along? Like, is Chin literally just going to be involved in that one incident in her life, or does she know Chin from earlier and maybe notice something about him and maybe lets him, you know, go with it, but then she sees that she's changed during the incident and that's what causes her to actually stand up to him? Because probably the biggest thing that needs, I suppose, expansion in the Kyoshi novel is why she made the decision to not interfere and counter Chin before he came to basically the peninsula that would become Kyoshi Island. Why did she not act until then. Because, like, obviously with Kuvira, Korra was injured up until then. She couldn't act against it, and because of also what happened, she had kind of isolated herself from everyone, so she wasn't even aware of what was happening. Here, like, unless you come up with a reason for like why Kyoshi would just completely separate herself from the politics of the world, she had to have known that this was happening, and so she purposefully chose to stay out of it. And obviously my interpretation on that has always been that, like, it is probably some issue with the king and the way he was ruling, of like, if he's having such a bad effect in Bossing Say, that's probably spreading out to the rest of the world. And if the people are willing to let Shin come in and take over, and he's doing it this quickly, that is the will of the people, basically, almost allowing Shin to do this. That he's not being opposed because, no one wants to oppose him. Anything is better than this. That's why they need the expansion, because, like, that roughly makes sense given what we know. But I assume there's going to be more depth that's going to have to be given. And that's why I hope they really expand on Shin as a character. Because you look back on the Avatar Day, and he is kind of treated like a joke. Like, they joke about it just with the fact that, like, he gets his clothes blown off, and then they make a joke about, oh, he was too stubborn and just stood still and died. When he basically did just as much as Kuvira. Now, they might do something to basically say that, like, it was made very easy for him by the world, but still, he was this notable conqueror in the Avatar world, and I think you have to give him that respect of, like, what he actually did. And so I hope they heavily expand on that. And I think how much they go into with regards to just the treatment of, like, the Earth King and of him and his people, and the details about what's happening here, that's going to be very telling for, like, the tone of the book with regards to, does Kyoshi have a, like, tragic upbringing? Is where she's from a very poor place, potentially because of stuff enacted by the Earth King at the time, or what? And I think that's where it's going to be, like, obviously, the absolute key to the book is going to be how descriptive they are about things, whether that be locations, the fight scenes, the moves that are going on, whether you decide to focus it completely on Kyoshi or you actually bring other characters into play. Because the other side of things that I think young adult is going to be helped by is that we know that Kyoshi is bisexual, and that was revealed in Turf Wars Part 1. That's going to have to be a factor as well, because we know she eventually has a child, Coco, later on in her life. So that means, there's at least one love interest in her life. But if she's bisexual, you would assume that along the way there probably is a female love interest at some point as well. So to me, it almost suggests that, like, during those, I suppose, maybe teenage, like early 20s or something like that, maybe even later, there probably is a couple of characters you probably have to introduce. And with the Kyoshi Warriors as well, like, I kind of wonder, like, could you involve that somewhere in that the first leader of the Kyoshi Warriors, if she was in a relationship with Kyoshi? I think that would be pretty interesting to, like, expand on what is present in Shells, but, like, give it even more depth. But as I said before, I think one of the main things to really explore in this is, where does the vision of Kyoshi kind of come from, the character that is eventually built, like the wearing the get-up that basically Kyoshi has, the armor, the fans, the makeup, the sort of intimidating persona that develops for the character. Where does that actually come from? Because, like, I don't think we have any real precedent in the world outside of, like, okay, war paint for, like, the Southern Water Tribe warriors and, bits and pieces here and there. Where does, like, this girl who grows up in the Earth Kingdom, like, how does she develop this persona? And to me, it's going to have to be this thing where along the way, like, where do fans become a key weapon for her? Where does she decide to wear the makeup, and so on? Because obviously, like, she grows up and is this exceptionally tall, physically imposing character. We know that. Does it just come from there, and that's her way to really, become the character that she needs to be? Is just really emphasizing the physical traits that she has, or what? Um, Outside of that, obviously later on, I assume more so in the second book, you are going to have to at some point address how Kyoshi lives to be 230 years old. That's probably the key thing in the entire book. And it's probably the biggest question people have about Kyoshi going in is just 230, even in this universe where we can accept that people live to be older than expected. That's crazy because like the closest character to Kyoshi is Guru Patik at 150, and then you have to go to I think Sozen's like just the one before that like 108 I think it is or something like that is when he dies. And like Guru Patik obviously is still alive. I don't know in Korra time if he's still alive, but that's a long time. I suppose Boomy actually I'm forgetting about is he's 112 and he's still alive. Again in Avatar time. But still, Kyoshi is twice as old as Boomy, over twice as old as Boomy, and she's like that. She only dies when she's 230. There has to be a reason behind that. That isn't just like she lives a super healthy life. She's like an athlete. She trains a lot, so she can get to that age. It almost means that there has to be some sort of like spiritual aspect or something going on here, like that she spends X amount of time in the spirit world, and there's some like reveal that if you spend enough time in the spirit world but not enough to just become a spirit, it kind of slows your aging or something like that. So if you keep coming in and out every so often from the spirit world, you can actually like live to be a very, very, very old. Unless there's going to be some technique revealed that can also kind of extend your lifespan. But I don't know if they'll go into that. Because it is one of those weird things where I don't know if we've ever got a real comment about it, but it's always felt like that was a mistake. The whole Kyoshi's 230 is a mistake fundamentally. That they said that big, like, oh, 400 years ago, Kyoshi was born here. Then they had to place Kyoshi somewhere in the timeline of avatars, and she's just like 2 avatars away. And so all of a sudden you can actually plan that, like work it all back, and you realize that, oh, wait, with Roku just before Aang, and then Kyoshi before Roku, Kyoshi's 230. She lives to be over 200 years old. Like that, you figure that out, and it seems like it's just another kind of timeline blunder type thing. But they're committing to it with this book. They're committing to making that a noted point that she is the oldest avatar who lives the longest. Is the human who lives the longest almost. To me that says that there's going to be an explanation behind it. I personally would be disappointed if it is just a case of like she's just an anomaly. There's no explanation for it. She just happens to live long because she's powerful or something like that. I do want there to be some reason. Even if it's maybe a weird reason, just give me something for why that is the case. And then after that, I suppose, you do have to explain stuff like, I suppose, the leadership of Kyoshi Island. In that we know Kyoshi's the leader. We know Coco becomes the leader at some point. I think it would also be interesting to know, like, just because Kyoshi lives so long, she basically has to outlive her daughter, which could be a pretty emotional and kind of crazy thing to get into as well. And this is all ignoring the fact that there's going to have to be like a character arc as well for Kyoshi, and that is, I suppose, developing the character from wherever she is at the start, the character that she is when she's much younger, before she maybe even knows about her bending, or when she first has her bending, to becoming the character who is so beloved by the fandom and stuff like that. And is also, and as this character that is almost like misunderstood, because I get it's a joke with Kyoshi, the idea of like Kyoshi will just kill anyone, and then she's just this really violent avatar. But like, I think that's purposely misleading in the sense of like, Kyoshi can be like that. When Kyoshi decides to do something, she will go for it, and she will do whatever needs to be done if she feels it's for justice. But we know from the whole Chin incident that she's not reactionary like that. She waited all of that time for him to come to her, and then she fought back. And even then, she didn't kill him herself. She probably could have done it because it was clear the power level was just insane. Because she just with airbending basically blew his clothes off, and the fact that she made an island showed that the difference in power as well. She still didn't like just purposefully kill him. It was, as we know, an accident. So there is that always that sense in that like she knows that she is an intimidating character. She has that ability within her to do it. She does that to the Earth King in the Peasant Uprising from Escape from the Spirit World 2. But she does that because she knows that's the only way to get a result out of that situation. So I think, for some people, it's just getting, I suppose, the legend of the character kind of confused in a way with who the character actually is. And we know from the way she talks to Aang, she is a much more thoughtful character than you would think. Of course, she absolutely would have the capacity, if she has, I suppose, does fight, to just destroy people, as we see. Like, she just annihilates, the king's guards, basically, when he tries to have her arrested, and stuff like that. But there's a much more in-depth character than I think just the jokey, Kyoshi will kill anyone and she's so violent and stuff like that. That's not really who she is. And I want to see that. I want to see where the sense of justice comes from, what in her, I suppose, early life prompted that, and that's where I do lean towards feeling that it probably is something, again, with the Earth King, and her feeling that she was let down, and she's going to do everything she can as she grows to, change things. And also, you may want to do something with the fact that she's bisexual and her trying to affect change. I don't know if you necessarily would have that be a huge part of the book, or what, but I think it has to be mentioned, given that we know that about her now. That I think is going to be a frustrating thing for people if the fact that she's bisexual isn't mentioned at all. But I'll say it again, like I've said this a couple of times before, like the Kyoshi novels are the thing that with Avatar that I'm most excited for coming up. I think this is beyond Imbalance, beyond Team Avatar Tales. Ruins of the Empire obviously is more new, and I'm really excited for that. I still think the potential of a really well done young adult Avatar novel exceeds that for me, because if there is the depth to the writing style and they tell Kyoshi's story well, adhering to the continuity and developing the stuff as they need to, I think that could be one of our best content releases we've had in a long, long time. And that's what has me so excited about this. I still think there's like maybe the potential that maybe it doesn't quite go the way I want, and maybe it ends up being maybe a little bit closer to this, rather than maybe, kind of us wanting a writing style closer to this, or even something like this. There's still that fear, but to me, 300 pages plus tells me there's depth here, that there's going to be notable stuff happening here, and they won't be afraid to tell a meaningful story. Bad stuff is going to happen, tell a tragic story, address the core of what's happening here, and address if there is kind of harsh stuff happening. I think they'll be able to do it. So that's the discussion topic. I'll just end by kind of quickly talking about my Patreon. because that is the way where you can suggest topics for me to discuss in this series, the Avatar discussion topic series. If you come in at the $5 tier on my Patreon, you can choose the topic for me to discuss in in one of these videos. And it's not just a case of like you choose the topic and that's it, I just go ahead and do it. It is a case of, you know, I will discuss with you but via messages, kind of back and forth, the details of what you want discussed in the video, to make sure it is the video that you want from your discussion topic. So just be aware of that. But yeah, my Patreon is linked in the description below if you want to support the channel and choose a discussion topic and get access to the Patreon exclusive videos that I have up, which cover my top 10 favorite anime. And there's also a video of me building a Lego kit on camera. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.